everybody, it's Pearl Chiarenza, and I am coming to you with another episode of Conversations with Pearl. And we're doing things a little different today. You know, I'm all about embracing and uplifting our women that come on the show. And today, our special guest is going to come as just an audio guest today because she has some powerful information to share and powerful story, but we also want to keep a sacred space for her. So I'm so excited today to introduce you to Mia Hanks. She is a survivor of a narcissist abuse. She was married to a covert narcissist for 29 years, and she recently published her memoir titled Bridemaid. She's hoping that her story today can help raise awareness about narcissism and also help other victims find their voices. And I love this subject today because, Mia, I think we have that story in us. We have that voice. And so often, sometimes through our lives and things that happen, our voice can feel like it's quiet and not being able to be shared. And I'm so proud to have you and honored to have you with us today. And I just wanted to also ask you how, when we first start our show, I want to ask you to think back to when you were a little girl. And when you were that little girl and you were thinking about what you want to be when you grow up, and how does that correlate to what you're doing today? Like some women we talk to, they want to be teachers, they want to be a nurse, whatever that was for you. What was that little Mia wanted to do when she grew up, and how does it compare to what you're doing today?
I'm not sure. I'm thinking as you were asking that, what did I want to be when I grew up? I think when I was younger, I always wanted to do something with music, perhaps something in the music business. How does that correlate with what I'm doing today? It doesn't. But I always wanted to do something creative as well, and so I think finally getting to author a book was definitely a creative endeavor. So I guess the creativity side of it does somewhat correlate. But no, I never thought I would be in the position that I am today, just with the background and the marriage and the divorce, and nobody plans for that. So uncharted territory.
Thank you for being open and vulnerable with that question. And I do think it does correlate with your music because music, like you said, is creative. And so you are being creative and sharing your story and putting it into a book. And your cover is a beautiful cover, by the way. I don't know if you created that
Thank
or
you.
not, but
Thank you.
it's really pretty. And so I think to me, if I feel like it correlates often together. I know, like for me, I've shared on the show oftentimes I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up, but I didn't have the ability and the guidance to go to college to do that. And here I am today. I'm a life coach. I'm empowering women to step into sharing their story, like what you're doing here today, to step into putting themselves first because we have to learn to do that, and that we are better able to show up for our loved ones and our friends and our family when we put ourselves first. And so I'm honored that you're coming on and sharing your story with us today. And I just want you, to let the audience know, like, so tell us a little bit about the story and where it led, how it led you to the book, and just walk us through a little bit about your story.
Yes. So I got married very young. I was 21 years old when I got married, and I was young and naive, and I had come from a very sheltered background, and just really felt like everybody out there was a great person, and no one had ill intentions, and I was very naive. Um, and I got into this marriage, and things didn't seem great, but I thought it was growing pains, and things would get better if I hung in there. And years, months turned to years, and years turned to decades. Um, and finally, after 29 years, I just came to the realization that I had to get out. And so the way the book came to be was when I was in the process of leaving. I was trying to find out everything I could about narcissism. I knew that's what I was dealing with. And I was trying to learn about it, specifically covert narcissism. And everything I found out there was written by, or seemed to be written by a therapist or a psychologist. And I really was searching for an insider point of view. I wanted to know from the inside, what does this look like for somebody else? Does it look like what my life has looked like? And I couldn't find anything out there written from a firsthand account. And so, yeah, I just decided that maybe a memoir could possibly be helpful to other people that were going through similar situations.
You bring up a good point because, again, we go back to being that little girl, that little us. We wanted to, we want the white picket fence. We want to get married with, all these things that we dream of. And in some cases, maybe we had, family members that were, parents that were, had a great marriage. In some cases, maybe we didn't, but we still want that big dream of, I'm going to find the love of my life and I'm going to spend the rest of my life with them. And then things can turn out to not be what that is. And so, like you said, 29 years. And so for the listener that's listening, one of the things, first of all, before go to that question, I want to ask you is that 29 years is a long time, but the like when you say covert, walk us through what covert means and when like into your marriage, like when did you start realizing that that's what you were dealing with?
I think I knew early on that there was narcissism, but nobody was talking about narcissism 30 years ago. So I'm not sure that I really knew what that was, but I definitely recognized those traits in my ex husband. I didn't really know until I started diving into it and really researching the topic. And that was way into my marriage, probably about year 27, when things were really falling apart. My health was deteriorating. And I started spending a lot of time doing some research and seeing a therapist as well. But covert narcissism is different, and it is considered one of the more dangerous types of narcissism. So basically, these people to the outside world, they're humble, they're kind, they're generous, they're extremely empathetic. All that is a lie, and but that's how they portray themselves to the outside world. Behind closed doors, they're manipulative, they're controlling, they're abusive, and mentally, in my case, it was just psychological abuse, and horrible psychological abuse. But to anybody outside my door, they thought I had the perfect husband. So it gets very complicated because when you realize what's going on and you need to find support and you need help, there are very few people out there that are going to believe you because they've only seen this wonderful empathetic person. Well, he has zero empathy, but trying to convince somebody that he's actually lying to them, it's a challenge. Yeah, for sure.
Wow, I can't imagine like so somebody's probably listening and said 27 years, like, that's a really long time. But then also there's so much truth about, and I talk about this often, especially when I coach and when I speak about how we don't know what goes on behind our closed doors. Nobody understands what goes on. And we get up, we put our makeup on, and we go walk out the door and we act like everything's great. It's part of one of the reasons why when I do a pajama retreat every year, Mia, and one of the things that is a requirement is there's no makeup. And I really believe there's a lot to be said when we take off the makeup and we just realize that life is real. There's things that are happening in our life. We have to work on it, and we have to either heal or we have to start working about how to move forward or make a change so that we can, our mental health can be taken care of. And so I can imagine like living so long. And as you were talking, I thought, wow, how many friends saw this, this other person outside your closed door? How many family members saw that? And you're right, because when the truth comes out, that that oftentimes you hear, "Well, I never knew," or if you even were to say something, "Well, that can't be because they're showing up this way or they're doing that." And so you probably, in some ways, I'm thinking the listeners that are listening that maybe are going through what you're describing are probably sitting there going, who's going to believe me? Who's going to hear me? Who's going to help me, right? And I'm sure there was times over those years you probably felt that isolation and some of those feelings that came up of like not being believable. And so for that person that's listening to us right now, what would you say to her? What would you advise her and how would you pour into her?
I think that another factor in all of this that I think it doesn't get talked about is just the embarrassment factor, right? I think that we want people to think we have it together. We want people to think everything's great. And so while my ex-husband was living this lie, of who he was, um, I was kind of living a lie too, because I wanted people to think we had it together. So I understand that, and there is an embarrassment to actually having to come clean and say, it wasn't good. Yeah, I've been suffering, and I think we don't want people to think that we need help. So it's hard to ask for help, but I think at the end of the day, if you're in one of these kinds of relationships, I mean, for your physical body and for your mental health, it's not sustainable. The level of stress that you are living under every day, that fight or flight mode, eventually it just breaks your body down. So, there comes a point when you have to kind of push that embarrassment aside and say, whether or not anyone believes me, however humiliating this might be, I just have to do this for myself. I have to get out for myself. And I think that's, it just becomes a matter of sustainability, really.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out the embarrassment factor because it shows up in so many places, not just, with what like the things you're describing, but like when we want people to believe that, like income levels are what they are, or everything's fine, financially, or, or even like, we lost our son 2 years ago in a tragic car accident. Sometimes we get up and want people to believe that, oh, we're fine, when really inside you're like falling apart because you don't want people to worry about you, or you don't or being honest and telling the truth sometimes is embarrassing because there's that worry about, well, why didn't you, and why didn't you ask for help, or why didn't you say something, and and it's like you said, whether it's our own shackles holding us back, or somebody in our head, as you are describing with your ex-husband, telling you that mental stuff about, I'm sure, like the worthiness and the value you bring into your life, it will hold us back. And so what I would love for you to share with listeners, and so I just want to dive a little bit more in like what and hopefully this question will kind of help the listeners. What was the factor, or what was the one thing? Because oftentimes we hear stories like yours where there's like that one thing that happened, you're like, that's it, I got to do something. What was the one thing that happened? And then, you mentioned how, even sometimes therapists don't always believe, or they don't always, if you don't have the right therapist, have the right skill set to help you, and because like you said, 30 years ago, we didn't have these conversations 30 years ago. But what was the one thing, Mia, for you that said, I got to make a change because I don't want to live my life like this anymore?
It was kind of a strange incident, really. Things were really falling apart. I was so miserable, and I was kind of considering the idea of, maybe I need to get out of here. But I didn't know how, and I didn't know if I, had that, I guess, permission to leave, right? And I happened to be scrolling through social media late one night. I was on Instagram, and I ran across a quote, and it just hit me, and it had to do with true intimacy, and it said something to the effect that true intimacy isn't always necessarily physical, but instead it's more about being able to look at your partner and say, I feel safe with you. And that word safe just grabbed me. And I sat there, and I kind of stared at that quote for a while, and I thought, I don't feel safe. And that was the point at which I started asking myself, why don't I feel safe? And have I ever felt safe in this marriage? And the answer was no. And that's really what prompted me to start researching, and I just started Googling things like toxic relationships, and taking online quizzes, is my relationship toxic, and that sort of thing. And it all led me to narcissism. And when I found that, I had all my answers. So that's really, that was kind of the moment that catapulted me into that research, which then, I figured, I learned, and I got into therapy and said, I've got to get out.
And there's always and I thank you for sharing that with us. There's always one thing, and I wrote down when you said, like, do you feel safe? I think that's a powerful question to ask. And if we have a listener that's listening, and any of this is, something that you're maybe facing, or you need help with, I think that's a powerful question to ask oneself. Do I feel safe? with my partner. And if the answer is not no, as Mia said, I think it's, reach out for help, make an appointment with a therapist, reach out to somebody that you trust and ask for help and guidance, because it is important to feel safe. I'm very blessed. Me, I've been with my husband we've been together 40 years. We've been married for 37 years. And when you said that, like, I got chills because I do feel safe, right? But I was thinking about somebody like you who can't answer yes to that question, and how that must feel, and how heavy, the answer to that must have felt for you, and maybe a listener that's listening to us, and to know, it just brings more blessings. No matter what I've gone through, what we've gone through in our marriage, we've always come back to how do we keep each other safe. And I grew up in a house, Mia, where, if my parents had a disagreement, they just didn't talk to one another. My both my parents were narcissist gaslighters to each other. And so I grew up in that household that, like I start saying, if they had an argument, they just didn't talk. You walked on eggshells, and then all of a sudden everything was fine. And you're like going, what happened? Like, what? Okay. Lack of communication, big time in my parents' marriage. They're no longer together after 43 years of marriage. They finally divorced. And, I'm glad my mom and her side did, because unfortunately my father was not a very faithful person. And then, because of that fed off both of what they would do for and to each other. But, every time when I met my husband, I met him at a very young age. I was 19 going on 20. And I remember, like, I remember the first time I met him, it was at Knott's Berry Farm. And we were just chatting. We were at a company picnic. We were just chatting. My roommate and his roommate, the four of us, were just kind of hit it off. And all the cars were gone in the parking lot. And I just thought, wow, he's such a cool guy. But, I went to my car, didn't think nothing about it. And my roommate, she's getting ready to get in my car. She's like, "You're gonna marry him someday." I go, "Excuse me? Like, are you kidding me? Like, he doesn't even have my phone number." "Oh yeah, he does. Our roommate does." And then, we say the rest is history. 3, 4 months later, we moved in together, and, got married a few years later. But the one thing I had remember saying to her when you said safe, that's why I got chills. I remember saying to her, "He's such like," I think I said something about, "He makes me feel protected." I think is what I'd said, like, and we had a great conversation, and even in my conversations that Chuck and I would have around lack of communication, because when him and I met, that's, as I shared, I didn't know what communication was. I didn't know how to tell somebody. All I knew was gaslighting, and, just ignore the things like that. And so he would be like, "I can't answer or help understanding what upset you, what I did or said, if you don't tell me." And I'm like, "Just don't talk to me." I just kind of throw that hand up.
That you
And
knew. Yeah.
yeah, and so finally he started Mia having the conversation for me, and that's where I got mad. I'm like, "I wasn't gonna tell you that," So we created this thing, and for the listeners that are listening, one of the things that we created amongst us was, allowing ourselves to say to one another, "Hey, I have something that's on my heart right now. Can I talk to you about it?" But allowing ourselves to say to each other, "Now's not a good time," with the commitment that within 24 hours, we would have a conversation about whatever was on our mind. And usually by then, you've kind of figured out, "Oh, I was overreacting," or, "It wasn't as bad," but you still had the conversation. And when you said, do I feel safe? Did you feel safe? That just all popped up for me. And I just wanted to share that to those that are listening. It is important, as Mia, as you shared, like, you have to feel safe, because, if you're not safe, then things need to change. And so thinking of change, like, first of all, I mean, I don't know, and you can share or not share, did you guys have children between you?
Yes, we have 2 children.
Okay,
They were both grown at the time that I left, so I
gotcha.
didn't have to deal with, family court and custody, and, that part was, that was good, that we didn't have to, fight over kids.
Right.
But yes, we had 2 kids.
So as you were going through this and having children, I mean, that's a whole nother factor too, because you're also trying to protect the kids. And, again, we go back to growing up. We don't want, divorced families, all these generational things we get told, like, especially for Catholic, get married forever. That was one of my mom's biggest struggles, not divorcing because she was Catholic. Oh, that's such a terrible thing, And I used to say, why? I don't think God wants you to be with somebody that's not treating you the way you should be treated. I could never
Correct.
understand that. But
Yeah.
so as you went through this, and like your family, as you made the decision that you have to, you need to put yourself to feeling safe again, what was the reaction from, like, your kids and your family as you went through this? Did some of them say, "Oh, we saw it, but we just never said anything," or how was the reaction for you?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction was definitely one of support. Um, my parents had seen this for years, and they didn't they kind of were treading lightly. They didn't want to create problems within my marriage, but yeah, I mean they were thrilled when I made that decision to leave. I mean, they saw the decline in me, and they were concerned. Um, my kids, interestingly enough, I mean, I my daughter said to me, probably about a year after I left, she said, you should have done this 10 years ago. So the kids saw what it was doing to me, even though we think kids don't really pay attention. I think they know more than we give them credit for sometimes. And honestly, my relationship with both of my kids is better today, because I can be more present for them. And so yeah, I feel like I had a lot of support. Everybody definitely made me feel like I was doing the right thing. But you bring up an interesting point. Society tells us you stay in a marriage, you don't walk away. Don't let your children be children of divorce. You don't want your kids to come from a broken home. It's good advice unless there's abuse involved. And then suddenly that's not good advice. And so, yeah, in retrospect, I was trying to, I guess, quote unquote, do the right thing. But really, as I look back, it wasn't the right thing to stay. I should have left.
Yeah, and you're so right. Like they tell us, like I think I said that to my mom and my parents' divorce too. I was like, Mom, you should have done it. Like when I found out how my parents met, I actually said to my mom, that should have been your first sign to not get married to my father. And her reaction was, well, you probably wouldn't be here if I'd done that. I go, I think I would have been here in another capacity. It may not have been my mother, but I think somewhere's away I would have been here. Because I mean, they ran off and got married. It's a crazy story. They ran off and got married. My mother was going to be the maid of honor for her best friend who was supposed to marry my dad. Because she was underage to get married in New York State, her and my dad took off to Tijuana and got married. And then a year
Wow.
and a couple months later, here I was. But I was like, really? And my mom was so funny. God bless her. Like, she didn't want people to know how old she is. She doesn't want people to know, things like that. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that should have been your first sign. I joke all the time because, my dad was in Vietnam War, and because of how unfaithful that he was, I joke all the time. And I say to my husband, I said to my boys, I'm like, if there's ever a knock on the door from somebody who's of the Asian descent, just let them in. If they say they're my sibling, just let them in and tell them be home for a cup of coffee sometime soon, because that's how my dad was. That's how I grew up. But I remember when my mom left, there was support, especially from us and us kids, and the things my dad was just horrible the way he went about everything, because it also affect, like, he did things and said things to my boys, through everything, and was very threatful to my kids about not sharing things. He pulled all his stunts when my mom wasn't home, and he actually had my boys for vacation, and he did some things. And even like you said, like, kids know, like, my kids were, fourth grade and second grade, or fifth grade and second grade. And I remember, my dad was trying to sell some of my mom's stuff at a yard sale. My mom collected tin cans. And I guess I found out later that my oldest son had said, Papa, you can't sell those. Grandma's going to get really upset. And his response was, don't say anything or you'll never see her again. So the little fifth grader was like, I can't tell anybody anything. And so our kids, you're right. What you said is so true, because it scared the heck out of my son, that when I finally was able to start to help my mom pack up their house, she kept saying, I don't know where my tin cans are. I'm like, Mom, I don't know what to tell you. And he would come in, he'd be in the room and he would leave. And then this one time he came in, he's like, can you stop talking about those tin cans? I was like, okay, what's going on? So and he explained, he finally told us, and I was like, you're in a safe space. Nothing can happen to you,
Yeah.
but you are so true. Our kids, and that's so true. Generation is like you said, stay in, don't have a broken home. And truly, I think about your daughter and your son. I'm glad that, you've got this great relationship. Do people ever ask you, like, how does it affect your daughter, like, looking back, like, because oftentimes too we hear people talk about, well, the example we're giving our kids by staying or by leaving, there's both sides of the fence on that. Do you ever wonder about that? Have you and her ever talked about, like, how does it affect relationships as she moves into her dating and world?
Yeah, we actually have. I mean, it has prompted some really good discussion. But what you just said, it's the example that it sets for the kids. And so for my kids, they didn't get to witness a healthy marriage. Um, what they witnessed is their normal. That's what they know. That's what they saw. And so because I stayed for their entire upbringing, that's what they witnessed. And so that's the reason why, it's not good advice to stay when there's abuse in the home because and a lot of things that goes back to a lot of people um they're not sure when it's psychological abuse. Is this really abuse? Is this worth leaving over? I think a lot of people think if it's not physical, maybe I don't have permission to leave. Maybe that's not okay. Um, but the kids see that psychological abuse and it affects them too. So definitely, it has a chance to affect their relationships because you imitate what you see. So yeah, I've had a lot of good conversations with my kids, and that's the main reason though I think to not stay.
Uh-huh.
And letting your kids be uh, children of a broken home, if there's abuse, that's the healthiest thing for them, to let them have a chance at witnessing a healthy relationship.
Yeah, that's beautiful advice. I love that you share that, and I'm glad that it opens up great conversations because that's exactly how the house I grew up in. I mean, because it was so broken, I wanted to be out of the house as soon as I could. I was telling my friend the other day. I said to Michelle, I said, had I known about emancipation, how you whatever it's called, do you leave your
Eman-
parents?
emancipation, is that what
Yes,
it's?
thank you. Well, if I had known about that, probably I would have probably tried to pursue that and gone and stay with my girlfriend and her family because of my upbringing, because I wanted to be, I was always, unfortunately for my mom, my dad, when he was at war, she worked at the house. So I was always having to take care of my brothers and sister. And so, I at 12 years old, 12 and a half years old, I started babysitting. I did everything I could to get out of the house. By then, my dad was home full time, but I wanted to be out of the house. And 17 and a half years old, I graduated high school and I was like, I was already paying my own car payment, paying my car insurance. I was working full time. And then my dad's like, you got to pay rent. I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm moving out. I got to pay rent and have curfew. No way. And to live in this kind of household, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it myself. So I think I was very lucky. I look back and I'm like, I was glad I was so that independent. And in a lot of ways, as much as I didn't like growing up and learning people pleasing, it also taught me to be independent and not have to rely on my mom and dad or anybody else. So to go off on my own and get a roommate, like I wanted out so bad, Mia. My roommate, we shared a one bedroom apartment. That's how bad I wanted out. Like we shared,
But that's how
we,
bad you wanted out of that toxicity. I mean,
yeah,
your mental health, you probably weren't thinking about your mental health at the time, but, yeah, it was
yeah.
self-preservation.
For sure. So tell us about the book. So, you've written your memoir called Bridemaid. Tell us like what led you to want to write the book and why did you want this memoir out there? Because it's, like it's a lot of risk, hence why, we're talking the way we're talking today. There's a lot of factors you probably had to take into consideration. And what led you how did you decide to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big risk, and early on, it wasn't a risk that I thought was worth taking. But I started a TikTok account where I was posting a lot of information about narcissism, narcissistic abuse, warning signs, red flags, that sort of thing. And um, I kind of got this big following on TikTok. So many people commenting every single day, saying things like, "I'm in this kind of relationship. I need help. I can't get out. I'm stuck. What can I do?" And I realized how many people are in these types of marriages and relationships. And quite honestly, they're stuck. And so, yeah, I thought maybe it is a risk worth taking to just share my story and maybe it can help somebody out there, and so that's what I did. And I basically started at the very beginning when I met my now ex-husband. I was 19 years old, and it's told in a series of short stories, just chronicling chronologically our whole marriage up through our divorce. And yeah, I'm hoping it can just give people an insight to see this is what it looks like, and this is what happens.
Well, I think it's going to be very powerful. And I think that people definitely need to pick it up. And I think, especially if you're listening to us today and anything that Mia and or I have shared with you is resonating with you, one, we both want you to know that you're not alone. that you don't have to put yourself into a long-term situation, that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to make a decision to make sure you're safe. As Mia said, if you don't feel safe, then there's resources out there to put yourself safe. And so Mia, tell everybody how they can reach out to you.
I have a website. It's miajhanks.com. There's a link on my website to purchase my book through Amazon. My book's available anywhere online books are sold, Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, and it's available in ebook and paperback.
I love that. So, Mia, let me ask you, I always like to ask my guests, we're going to shift a little bit to what is one of your favorite things you like to do for your self-care?
For self-care, I have a hobby. I crochet, and I started doing this kind of late in my marriage when I was just starting to crack under all the stress. I needed an outlet, and I found that it was a way to just kind of escape for a little while and put all my concentration, into this project. And it really was therapeutic. It turned out to be very therapeutic for me. So, yeah, I definitely consider that part of my self care. I crochet.
I love that. I tried to learn that when I was a kid. I was trying to make my brother a sweater. It never finished. I had one of my mom's friends was teaching us when we lived in North Carolina, and my parents moved us to Florida. So I never finished it, but I loved doing it. It was very relaxed. I remember like we'd sit there and I think her and I had a conversation. This is so like at first I thought it was boring, and then I was like, this is fun. She goes, yeah, it's relaxing, isn't it? I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. But yeah, it is. So I love
It
it.
it is, it's
Yeah.
I think anything like repetitive motion, and there's something about it that, and it's very tedious, and it requires a lot of concentration, and so, for me, it was just a great escape, yeah, it was a huge help in those later years of my marriage. I think it was, very therapeutic for me.
That's awesome. Okay, so somebody's probably gonna ask me if I don't ask you this question. So how is life today now that you've come through this, and do you have anybody in your life today? And how has it affected your relationships going forward?
I think so today my life is very different. I'm very, I just live a very relaxed life. Things are just kind of moving at a slower pace. I love it. I feel like I'm in charge. I can make my own decisions, and I'm not being controlled and criticized and scrutinized. So it's a very relaxed lifestyle. And yeah, I think moving forward, looking at just how it affects interactions with people, I'm not very trusting, and, I'm just very always worried somebody has an angle, and that's just coming from this abusive background, but yeah, I'm really enjoying just being on my own and doing my own thing, and just growing a little bit more each day and trying to figure out who I am.
I love that. I'm so proud of you for saying, I'm taking time for me and, figure out who I am because, oftentimes in situations like what you're describing, some people go from relationship to relationship and they just repeat the cycle, and not taking time between is can be such a detriment. And so I'm glad you're doing that. And I'm honored that you came on, and I'm honored you shared your story with us and the listeners today. And so before I let you go, before we close out, I did tell Mia, we always do this at the beginning of the show. I should let her know that we have our Better Questions, Better Life cards. So these are cards that my friend Diane Allen and my really good friend Carol Gill put together. There are over 70 cards. I keep half upstairs in my office and half downstairs for myself, but they're cards you can journal on, you can meditate on, you can just grab a card and just think about it, take a picture and put it on your phone for the day. But I'm going to shuffle them, and Mia's going to tell me when to stop, and we're going to ask her to answer the question of the card she picked. So here we go, Mia. Tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay, so your question says, am I enjoying the ride? Are you enjoying the ride now, Mia?
I am. I was not enjoying the ride a few years ago. It was a terrible ride. Uh, Today I am. I really am, and it's so much of the ride today is just figuring things out, and just really trying to understand, who am I? What do I want to do with my life? Um, and but it's fun. It's a fun adventure. It does feel like an adventure every day, for the first time I'm doing things on my own and realizing that I can be independent and I'm capable. which is something I was always told I was not during my marriage. So it is a very exciting ride. Yes.
I'm so proud of you. I'm so honored that you are here with us today and yeah, like taking time for yourself and I'm really enjoying the things that you want to do and that maybe you were held back on for so long is a powerful thing. And I just want to let all the listeners know that we'll put everything in the show note and how you can reach out to Mia, how you can download her book. And if you want to reach out to us for anything that we talk about today, please just email info@wsliving.com and put the word Shiro in the subject matter. But as I tell everybody all the time, we come into this world, we're a little rough oyster on the outside. There's lots of things we go through in our life, lots of different things. It could be trauma or just triumphs or whatever it might be. But as you open up that shell inside, you will find your own inner pearl to greatness. And I hope today Mia has inspired you to go find your inner pearl to greatness. Thank you.